Imagine a machine so massive it can lift small airliners. A flying titan that towers over 40 feet tall and stretches longer than 3 school buses. Now imagine this behemoth falling from the sky in flames, plummeting directly toward a minefield. That's exactly what happened in August 2002, when a single shoulder-fired missile changed the course of Russian military aviation forever. What followed became the deadliest helicopter crash in history. This is the story of how a handful of guerrilla fighters armed with a single weapon managed to inflict a devastating blow that claimed 127 lives in mere minutes. The Mi-26, codenamed Halo by NATO, represents the pinnacle of heavy-lift helicopter engineering. First taking flight in December 1977, this Russian colossus remains unmatched in its class even today. Standing over 40 feet tall and stretching an astonishing 131 feet in length, the Mi-26 dwarfs most aircraft in its category. Powered by twin D-136 turboshaft engines generating a staggering 11,400 horsepower each, the Mi-26's 7 massive rotor blades create a downwash that can literally flatten surrounding vegetation during takeoff and landing. This aerial titan can transport up to 20 tons of cargo, whether troops, supplies, or even heavily armored vehicles. In fact, the Mi-26 can actually lift small airliners, making it the undisputed heavyweight champion of helicopter aviation. It holds the record as the largest helicopter ever to enter serial production, a record that stands unbroken to this day. For the Russian military engaged in the brutal Chechen conflict, the Mi-26 wasn't just impressive machinery, it was an essential lifeline in a region where ground transport had become increasingly dangerous. By 2002, Russia was 3 years deep into its second war in Chechnya. The first conflict had ended in 1996 with Russian withdrawal and Chechen de facto independence. But in 1999, a series of apartment bombings across several Russian cities killed hundreds of civilians. The Russian authorities blamed Chechen militants for these attacks, providing the trigger for the Second Chechen War. Russian forces launched a massive offensive, determined not to repeat what many Russians saw as the humiliation of the first conflict. By mid-2002, however, the nature of the war had evolved dramatically. The destroyed Chechen capital of Grozny had fallen to Russian forces, but large-scale battles had given way to a protracted insurgency characterized by guerrilla warfare tactics. Chechen fighters employed hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, and improvised explosive devices against Russian troops. Daily attacks continued despite the Russians' overwhelming firepower advantage. The conflict had settled into a grinding war of attrition that was taking a severe toll on both sides, with civilians caught in the crossfire and infrastructure reduced to rubble. For Russian troops stationed at the Khankala military base on Grozny's outskirts, air transport had become critical. Ground convoys faced constant threat of ambush along Chechnya's dangerous roads. The skies, by comparison, seemed safer, a deadly misconception that would soon be exposed. August 19, 2002. A sweltering summer day at Mozdok Air Base in Russia. A massive Mi-26 helicopter prepares for a routine transport mission to Khankala. The crew performs pre-flight checks as soldiers file into the cargo hold. The helicopter is designed to carry 90 personnel. That day, 147 people would board, 57 over its normal capacity. The practice of overloading had become commonplace, a dangerous compromise born of necessity in wartime. By mid-afternoon, the overloaded giant lifts off, its twin engines straining against the excessive weight as it heads toward Grozny. Unknown to the Russian forces, a small but highly effective group of Chechen fighters had positioned themselves in abandoned apartment buildings surrounding the Khankala base. For months, they had been watching, studying the predictable patterns of Russian helicopter flights, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. This specialized unit would later be identified as the Chechen Air Defense Forces Group, created in the summer of 2001 under the personal leadership and financial backing of veteran rebel commander Shamil Basayev. Intelligence gathered after the incident revealed that this team had received approximately $1 million for weapons procurement. The fighters allegedly underwent specialized combat training at a military facility in Turkey, learning sophisticated anti-aircraft tactics. The funds were used to purchase 10 portable surface-to-air missile systems in neighboring Georgia, which were then smuggled across the border into Chechnya. Their weapon of choice was the Russian-made 9K-38 Igla, a sophisticated shoulder-launched heat-seeking missile capable of striking aircraft at altitudes up to 3,500 meters. These portable systems were particularly lethal because they were nearly impossible to detect before launch. By August 2002, this Chechen unit had already claimed responsibility for downing 6 Russian helicopters. The Mi-26 approaching Khankala would be their 7th and most devastating target. The Mi-26 was now just moments from landing. Inside, officers and soldiers prepared for arrival, gathering their gear. From a second-floor window in an abandoned apartment building, a Chechen fighter raised the Igla to his shoulder. He tracked the massive helicopter through the missile's sighting system, waiting for the critical lock-on tone. The signal came. He pulled the trigger. The missile streaked toward the descending helicopter, leaving a trail of smoke. In seconds, it struck one of the Mi-26's engines. Immediately, flames erupted from the stricken engine. Inside the overcrowded cabin, panic spread as the helicopter lurched violently. The pilots fought desperately for control as warning alarms blared throughout the cockpit. But the damage was catastrophic. As the burning helicopter descended, another horrifying realization dawned on the crew. They were plummeting directly toward an anti-personnel minefield that surrounded the Khankala base for protection. The Mi-26 slammed into the anti-personnel minefield, triggering a chain reaction of explosions that tore through the aircraft's underside. The impact crushed the main cargo hold, buckling the structure and trapping scores of soldiers inside as flames quickly engulfed the wreckage. Fuel flooded the interior, accelerating the fire as thick black smoke billowed from the crash site. Those still conscious faced an impossible choice: remain in the burning helicopter or flee into a minefield. The sheer number of passengers, 57 over capacity, made the situation even more chaotic, with panic spreading as quickly as the flames. The overcrowding meant only 2 escape routes remained viable: a small cockpit exit hatch near the front of the helicopter and the side doors. Those few who managed to escape found themselves stranded among active mines, unable to move to a safe distance as the inferno consumed the aircraft behind them. Each desperate step risked detonating another mine. Rescue teams watched in horror from the Khankala base. They could see survivors, some with severe burns, waving frantically for help, but could not immediately approach. Mine clearance experts had to methodically create safe passages through the minefield, precious minutes lost while survivors suffered. When rescuers finally reached the crash site, they discovered a scene of unimaginable devastation. Many of the wounded who had initially survived the impact and fire would later succumb to their injuries. 14 survivors would die in the days that followed from severe burns, pushing the final death toll even higher. When the final toll was counted, 127 of the 147 people aboard had perished, making it the deadliest helicopter crash in Russian military history and the worst loss of life in helicopter aviation worldwide. In the days that followed, the Russian authorities engaged in what many observers would later call a systematic attempt to downplay the tragedy. Initial reports from the Russian Ministry of Defense claimed a technical failure had triggered a warning light, indicating an engine fire before the crash. The early casualty figures were dramatically understated, with officials first reporting only 112 passengers and 5 crew members aboard. This number was later revised downward to just 85 by the Defense Ministry, before finally acknowledging 132 passengers were on board, still short of the actual count. Some pro-Moscow Chechen leaders backed these claims, insisting that such an attack could not have occurred so close to a major Russian military installation. However, local eyewitnesses told a different story. Multiple residents reported seeing a man fire what appeared to be a shoulder-launched missile from the second floor of an abandoned building near Grozny. The Chechen separatists quickly claimed responsibility, and a month later, in September 2002, a Chechen video of the Mi-26 downing surfaced online through a Turkish news agency. The video included a statement from separatist Chechen President Aslan Maskadov. "Here is a helicopter that is on fire and falling down near Khankala. It was hit by our Igla anti-aircraft missile." As the truth became impossible to deny, Russia's grief turned to anger, not just at the Chechen attackers, but at their own military leadership. The Russian media accused military authorities of incompetence and an attempted cover-up, drawing parallels to the Kursk nuclear submarine disaster just 2 years earlier. President Putin declared a national day of mourning on August 22, 2002. In retaliation, Russian forces demolished the apartment blocks near the base from where the missile had been fired, leaving over 100 families homeless despite protests. A Russian general justified these demolitions by claiming local residents had known about the Chechen rebels and failed to inform Allied forces of their plans. The attack prompted a comprehensive investigation by Russian authorities. The search for those responsible became a top priority, with particular focus on recovering the Igla missile system used in the attack. Investigators ultimately discovered missile components in the apartment blocks, confirming eyewitness accounts. In September 2002, Colonel Ilitali Pavlov, the Russian Army's aviation commander, was suspended over the incident. He would later resign his position entirely as fallout from the disaster continued. President Putin publicly criticized the Defense Ministry for its violations of safety protocols, particularly the dangerous practice of overloading transport helicopters. After months of investigation, Russian prosecutors announced they had identified what they called a gang of aircraft gunners who had waged a personal war against Russian aircraft for 2 years. This small team had proven extraordinarily effective, downing 3 helicopters and killing over 150 Russian personnel during their campaign. In April 2004, a Russian court sentenced 27-year-old Chechen fighter Jabrail Temirov to life imprisonment for his role in the attack. Prosecutors alleged that Temirov had delivered the Igla missiles in his personal vehicle and had filmed the attack. The court ordered him to pay 100,000 rubles to the relatives of each victim and 50,000 rubles to each surviving victim. 4 other Chechen fighters identified in the video remained at large, fugitives from Russian justice. The Mi-26 crash at Khankala has largely faded from public memory outside military and aviation circles. Few photographs exist, and time has dimmed awareness of this tragedy. Yet it remains one of the most devastating single attacks in the Chechen conflict, a stark illustration of asymmetric warfare's lethal potential, where one fighter with one missile could inflict such catastrophic damage. For the families of the 127 who perished and for the Russian military, the echoes of that August day in 2002 still resonate, a painful chapter in the storied history of the flying giant known as the Halo.